Hey guys, it's Geography Lover here. Welcome back to another brand new video. And today we're looking at events in the 1920s. I know I made a video 2 months ago talking about events in the 1990s. So I wanted to extend the decade history playlist that's going to be made. The second one, it's about the 1920s, as you guys can tell from the title. And it goes from 1921 to 1929. I know 1920 itself was also part of the decade, but it was technically some people say it's the end of the 1910s, but that's a different topic. So let's get to the 1920s, 20s, or the Roaring 20s, as some people like to call it as well. So first up is politics. Everyone's favorite. The three presidents of the 1920s were Warren Harding, the 29th president. He was president from 1921 to 1923. He won the 1920 presidential election, and he was a Republican. But he ended up dying in 1923 of a heart failure, or he had stomach cancer or something like that. And then his vice president, Calvin Coolidge, took over. He was the 30th president. He was president from 1923 to 1929. He did end up winning the 1924 presidential election, against beating John Davis and Robert La Follette, who was leader of the Progressive Party. And then he decided not to run for re-election, so Herbert Hoover ended up winning 1928, and he was president from 1929 to 1933. He was 31st president. The 28th president, Woodrow Wilson, technically also as part of the 1920s, but as I said, my 1920s is going to be from 1921 to 1929, so he doesn't really technically count. The main scandals of the 1920s, and politics-wise, was the Teapot Dome scandal, which was kind of in the Harding administration, where there was some stuff going on in the government. That was a whole thing. It wasn't just Republicans, though, who were part of it. Also, Democrats and progressives were also part of that whole thing. Next, we have fashion and tech. So the famous fashion in the 1920s were the flappers, who were these young women who wore these like elaborate dresses. They were very short. They come in a variety of different colors. You can see there's a white one here, a tan one here, a pink one, leopard skin, and black. They had these little cuffs here. Some of them did, some of them didn't. They also wore hats, short hats that kind of cover their face too a little bit, and they had short hair about to their neck. So that's what the style was for women. For men, they pretty much wore suits, vests, kind of was very simple with a hat. Nothing really crazy. And the main tech of the 1920s was the invention of main radios, like these little radios here that were, I think, called tombstone radios. And there was the other type of radios that had a big thing there, and they had some you could tune. They had tuning for the first time, I think, officially here. So the radio was a big thing in the 1920s, and also the telephone was as well. The Alexander Graham Bell candlestick telephone was also a big part. That's not on here, but that's also a huge tech part of the 1920s. Next is entertainment and music. We have the shows. This is a picture of Chicago, not the musical. Shows. They also had cabarets, which is also musical. Musical-like type show where people kind of sit down and eat while performers kind of do a little production. One of the main films were they had a lot of silent films. They didn't talk. There was just words on the screen, and a main actor there was Charlie Chaplin. A lot of his films were also during the 1920s. There are other actors as well, but I just have Charlie Chaplin here representing them. The main music at the time was jazz. Have you guys heard like All That Jazz from Chicago? It also relates to that. And the main area where people used to hang out was speakeasies. Now, speakeasies were kind of like bars, but they were illegal at the time. So they were very secret. You had to say a password to get in there. And it was basically like an illegal bar. That's what it was in the 1920s. And we'll get to the reason why they were illegal. Controversies and crimes. Prohibition. Now, prohibition was the law, the 18th Amendment, also the Volstead Act, which prohibited any sale of alcohol or consumption of alcohol. As you can tell, these people are pouring out liquor. Prohibition lasted from 1919 to 1933, so it lasted before the 1920s, just a year, and then it ended after the 1920s. So it was all during the Roaring 20s, Prohibition was in effect. Many places had those speakeasies. Many politicians drank, many people drank, and didn't really follow the law, which was not very good. And there were many, speaking of not following the law, we have some criminals here. We have Al Capone, one of the most famous criminals from Chicago. His nickname was Scarface. And we have another famous couple, Bonnie and Clyde, who murdered a lot of people. So we have those criminals there. The economy situation was pretty positive for the early 1920s, between 1920 and 1928. So most people bought some stocks, and the economy was really improving, which is why they call it the Roaring Twenties. It was a boom in the economy, while the Dow Jones growing to its highest it had been first recorded. But unfortunately, on October 29th, 1929, the stock market crashed on Black Tuesday, which led to one of the worst economic situations in history of the United States, with employment going up 500% and leading to one of the leading causes of the Great Depression of the 1930s. Now, next is culture. Some popular sayings of the decade were fuzz, which meant police, the bee's knees, which kind of meant like cool or attractive, booze, which meant liquor, jalopy, which meant like this old rundown car, which was like garbage, peepers, which meant eyes, and scratch, which meant money. And these pictures here are people at a party, kind of dancing, part of the culture at the time. As I said, the illegal liquor, the short hair flappers, short dresses, and a lady dancing there. At the end of the decade ended on December 31st, 1929, kind of during the Great Depression. But by the end of the 1920s, there was a lot of change, which was considered worse because of the stock market crash of 1929, which led to the Great Depression of the 1930s. Most of the trends of the 1920s were out of fashion because of the chaos of the 1930s and World War II. But by the end of the decade did show growth at the beginning of it, and it led to some social change, which allowed, especially the 19th Amendment, which allowed the women the right to vote, and allowed the country to grow into an economic power later in the 20th century. Thank you guys for watching this video. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next video. It will hopefully be next month.